I've been with the Tulsa Metropolitan Utility Authority for 9 years. In that time, I've replaced corroded service lines in neighborhoods older than statehood, crawled through storm overflow tunnels during flash floods, and once spent 3 days helping locate a catastrophic main break that turned out to be a fault in a 50-year-old cast iron junction nobody had inspected since installation. I am not someone who gets rattled by paperwork inconsistencies. I mention this because I want to be clear about the kind of person I am when I describe what I found starting in March of this year, and why I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. It started with a pressure irregularity. I was assigned to investigate a series of low-pressure complaints from residents on East 46th Street North, between Peoria and Lewis, in a neighborhood that sits on the tail end of a distribution loop fed by the Mohawk Park elevated tank. Low-pressure complaints are common enough. Usually it's calcification in aging galvanized lines, sometimes a partially closed valve somebody forgot to reopen after maintenance. I pulled up the hydraulic model on our system to trace the distribution path and identify potential restriction points, and that's when I noticed something strange about the demand calculations. The model showed higher than expected draw on the 12-inch transmission main feeding that loop. Not dramatically higher, maybe 15% above what the connected service addresses should produce. In isolation, that's nothing. Meters drift. Models have error margins, but the discrepancy had a geographic signature. When I looked at the demand nodes, there was a cluster of service connections pulling from a segment of the main that ran northeast, past the end of the mapped residential area, into what our GIS layer showed as undeveloped land between the Mohawk Park Golf Course and the Bird Creek floodplain. I assumed it was a mapping error. Our GIS system was migrated from an older CAD-based platform about 6 years ago, and during the transition, some legacy data got attached to wrong coordinates. It happens. I flagged it, noted it in my field report, and moved on to solving the actual pressure complaint, which turned out to be a frozen gate valve at a junction box on 46th Place. 2 weeks later, I was in the office writing up a different report when I remembered the anomaly and decided to check whether anyone had cleaned it up. Nobody had. The phantom demand nodes were still there. 7 of them clustered in a rough crescent shape, each showing active metered connections with account numbers. I clicked on one. The account had a service address, 2217 North Quanah Avenue. I typed the address into our billing system. It came back with an active residential account, monthly usage averaging 4,200 gallons, payment current, no delinquency flags. The account had been open since 1987. I looked up North Quanah Avenue on Google Maps. It doesn't exist. I checked the Tulsa County Assessor's parcel map. No such street. I searched our own internal street index, the one we use for service calls and new installations, and found nothing. I pulled up aerial photography on the county GIS viewer and looked at the area where our system placed those 7 nodes. I saw trees. Scrubby post oak and elm crowding up against the Bird Creek riparian corridor. No rooftops, no streets, no driveways. Nothing. I checked the other 6 accounts. All active. All with addresses on either North Quanah Avenue or North Tennessee Drive, a street I also cannot find on any map. Usage figures ranging from 3,100 to 5,800 gallons per month. All accounts open for at least 20 years, 3 of them dating to the late 1970s. I want to be precise about my reaction. I was not frightened. I was confused and mildly irritated in the way that a data integrity problem makes you irritated when you know cleaning it up will probably become your responsibility. I assumed these were orphaned accounts, maybe a planned development that was never built, with provisional accounts that were created and never closed, and some glitch in the billing system generating phantom usage figures. It's unlikely but not impossible. I wrote up a memo to my supervisor, Carl Trent, describing the discrepancy and asking whether I should open a work order to investigate or whether it fell under the GIS team's purview. Carl's response, which came the next day by email, was 4 words long. Leave that one alone. I am not the kind of person who takes a response like that as a provocation. I have a mortgage, 2 kids in school, and no interest in being dramatic about my job. But Carl is normally a thorough communicator. He writes detailed emails. He assigns tracking numbers to everything. A 4-word dismissal with no explanation and no tracking number was, in 9 years, something I had never received from him. I let it sit for about a week. Then I mentioned it to Renee Ashworth, one of our senior system analysts, during a ride-along to a booster station on the north side. I described the accounts, the non-existent streets, the usage figures. I asked if she'd ever seen anything like it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I've replayed in my head many times since. There are parts of the system that predate digital records. Some of those connections were grandfathered in during the 1971 consolidation. I wouldn't dig into it. The 1971 consolidation is when several independent water districts on Tulsa's margins were absorbed into the Metropolitan Authority. It was a messy process, different pipe sizes, different metering standards, different record-keeping systems. Everyone who works here knows the consolidation era is a nightmare for documentation. I accepted this explanation in the moment. It made sense. What didn't make sense was the look on Renee's face when she said it. She wasn't confused or dismissive. She was careful. She chose her words the way you choose words when you know exactly what you're talking about and have decided how much of it you're willing to say. I should have stopped. I recognize that. But I was a field technician with a hydraulic anomaly that was actively affecting system pressure in a neighborhood where people were calling to complain, and nobody was giving me a straight answer about why. So I did what I would do with any unexplained infrastructure issue. I went to the physical records. Our department maintains a records archive in the basement of the operations building on Charles Page Boulevard. Most of it was digitized years ago, but the original engineering drawings, construction permits, and as-built surveys from the pre-consolidation era are still there in flat file cabinets and rolled tubes. I've accessed them before for other projects. Nobody has ever told me I couldn't. I went looking for the original installation records for the 12-inch main that runs northeast from Mohawk Park. I found them easily. A 1968 construction drawing showing the main's route from the elevated tank through the residential grid and terminating at a dead end near the Bird Creek floodplain. Standard stuff. But clipped to the back of that drawing was a smaller sheet, a branch extension plan, dated 1974, showing a 6-inch line splitting off the main and running approximately 1,200 feet northeast into an area labeled, in neat engineering hand lettering, Quanah Heights Phase I. The drawing showed 7 residential service taps off that 6-inch line. 7. Matching exactly the number of anomalous accounts in our system. The extension plan was signed by a project engineer named Dale Mooring and approved by someone whose signature I couldn't read. There was a construction completion stamp dated November 1974 and a meter installation log showing 7 5/8-inch residential meters set between January and March 1975. Everything about the document was procedurally normal. It looked like any other branch extension from that era. The only difference was that the development it served does not appear to exist. I searched for Dale Mooring in our personnel records. He retired in 1998. I found a forwarding address in Owasso and a disconnected phone number. I searched obituary records. He died in 2004. I searched for Quanah Heights in the county planning records, the Tulsa Metropolitan Area Planning Commission archives, and the Oklahoma Secretary of State's business filings. I found nothing. No subdivision plat, no developer registration, no HOA incorporation, no building permits, no certificates of occupancy, nothing. A residential development was connected to our water system in 1974. 7 homes were metered. Those meters have been recording usage continuously for 50 years, but there is no legal record that the neighborhood was ever platted, approved, built, or occupied. At this point, my confusion had shifted into something else. Not fear, not yet. Something more like the feeling you get when you realize a problem you thought was small is actually structural, when you find rot behind a wall and understand it goes deeper than the surface. I decided to check the physical meters. Getting to the area required driving past the end of maintained road on 46th Street North, through a utility easement gate, and along a gravel track that our department uses for access to a pressure-reducing vault near the creek. I'd been on that track before. It runs through heavy tree cover and tall grass, the kind of forgotten edge of city land that looks like it could be anywhere in rural northeastern Oklahoma. I'd driven it maybe 3 times previously and never gone further than the vault. This time I continued past the vault, following the path of where the 6-inch branch line should be, based on the 1974 drawing. About a quarter mile past the vault, the gravel track curved north and the vegetation changed. The post oaks thinned out and were replaced by older, larger trees, pecans and cottonwoods that suggested a different land use history. The grass was shorter, not mowed exactly but managed somehow, kept down. And between the trees, set back from what I can only describe as a road, though it wasn't paved and wasn't on any map, I saw houses, 7 houses, single-story ranch style, probably 1,100 to 1,400 square feet each, brick and frame construction, composition shingle roofs. The architectural style was consistent with mid-1970s residential construction in the Tulsa metro area. They were arranged in a gentle curve along the unpaved road, with modest front yards and chain-link fencing around some of the back lots. They looked occupied. I need to be specific about what I mean by that. The yards were maintained, not pristinely, but to the standard of any working-class residential street, grass cut within the last 2 weeks, no accumulated debris, hedges trimmed roughly. Several houses had items visible on their porches: a folding chair, a ceramic planter, a welcome mat. One had a garden hose coiled beside the front spigot. One had curtains in the windows that were partially open. I could see the back of a couch through one of them, but there were no cars, no mailboxes, no power lines running to the houses, no visible electric meters, no satellite dishes or cable junction boxes, no addresses posted on the houses or the curb. And this is what I noticed most acutely: no sound. In a neighborhood, even a quiet one, you hear things: air conditioning compressors, a television behind a wall, a dog, a door closing somewhere. I heard nothing but wind and birds. I parked my truck at the edge of what I'm calling the road and sat there for several minutes. I was running through explanations. A movie set maybe, but there was no production infrastructure anywhere in sight, and these buildings had foundations and aging brick and roof moss. An abandoned development that was built but never sold, but the yards were maintained and there were personal items visible. A community of people living off-grid on land they didn't legally own. This seemed the most plausible to me at the time, though it didn't explain the 50 years of water billing. I got out and walked to the nearest house. I found the meter box in the front yard, approximately where the 1974 drawing indicated it would be. Cast iron lid, standard residential size. I opened it with my meter key. Inside was a 5/8-inch positive displacement meter, old, definitely original from the installation era. A Hersey brand, which is what we were using in the mid-70s. The register dial was turning, slowly at the rate you'd expect from a low-flow fixture, a dripping faucet, or a toilet with a slow leak. But it was turning. Water was moving through that meter and into that house. I checked 3 more meter boxes. All contained operational meters. All showed current readings consistent with the billing records I'd seen in our system. All dials were showing some level of flow. I walked up to the front door of the first house. The welcome mat said "Bless this home" in faded green letters. I knocked. I waited 60 seconds and knocked again. No answer. No sound from inside. I walked around to the side of the house and looked through a window where the curtain was slightly parted. I saw a kitchen. Yellow linoleum floor, older wood panel cabinets, a white refrigerator. On the counter next to the sink, there was a drinking glass with approximately 2 inches of water in it. The faucet appeared to be dripping. I could see a slight shimmer at the spout tip. That was the source of the meter flow. A dripping faucet. In a house with no electricity, no apparent occupant, and no legal existence. A faucet that had been dripping, based on the meter records, for decades. I went back to my truck and drove back to the operations building without stopping. It was a Thursday afternoon. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before going inside. I did not write a report that day. I went home, ate dinner with my family, helped my daughter with her math homework, and lay awake until 3 in the morning. The next day I went back to the records archive. I pulled every maintenance ticket associated with the 6-inch branch line or any of the 7-meter accounts. I found 11 tickets spanning from 1979 to 2019. All were routine meter reads, leak checks, one valve replacement in 1993. Each ticket had a technician's name on it. I recognized 3 of them as current employees. The rest were people who had retired or left the department before my time. I started with someone I knew, Marcus Delano, a senior field tech who's been with the authority since 1991. His name appeared on a 2006 meter verification ticket for 2217 North Quanah Avenue, the first account I'd looked up. I found Marcus in the break room the following Monday and asked him about it. I tried to be casual. I said I was cleaning up some old records and wanted to verify the location of some meters near the Mohawk area. Marcus set down his coffee and looked at me with an expression I've been trying to name ever since. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something like exhaustion, the look of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has just been asked to pick it up again. "You found Quanah Heights," he said. I told him I had. He said, "You went out there." I said yes. He asked if I knocked on any doors. I said I'd knocked on one. He asked if anyone answered. I said no. He nodded slowly and then he said, "Don't knock again. If you go back, don't knock. Don't go inside. Don't go at night, and don't go on weekends." I asked why. He said he didn't know exactly. He said when he was new in the early 90s, a supervisor named Bill Carnes told him the same thing. He said the protocol was informal, nothing written down, but every field tech who'd been assigned that section learned it eventually. Check the meters if you have to. Don't interact with the houses beyond that. Don't try to contact anyone. Don't report the anomaly up the chain. I asked him what happens if you go at night or on weekends. He said Bill Carnes went out there on a Saturday once in 1994. I asked what happened. Marcus said Bill transferred to the wastewater division 6 weeks later and retired the following year. He said Bill never told him what he saw, only that the transfer request was his own, and that he never wanted to be assigned north of 36th Street again. I asked Marcus who was paying the water bills. He said he didn't know and didn't want to know. He said the accounts had always been current and that was enough for him. He told me to be smart, finish my pressure investigation using some other explanation and leave it alone. I did not leave it alone. I pulled the billing records for all 7 accounts and traced the payment history. Water bills in our system can be paid several ways: automatic withdrawal, mailed check, online payment, or in person at our customer service office. All 7 Quanah Heights accounts were paid by check. Physical checks, mailed to our payment processing center every month for decades. The checks were drawn on an account at a bank called Farmers and Merchants of Cadusa, a small community bank east of Tulsa. The account holder name on file was Quanah Heights Homeowners Association, an HOA for a neighborhood that doesn't legally exist, writing checks from a bank account, paying utility bills for houses that contain nothing but dripping faucets and empty rooms. I called Farmers and Merchants. I identified myself as a utility representative and asked to verify the status of the account. The clerk told me it was an active commercial checking account that had been open since 1976. I asked if she could tell me who the signatories were. She said she'd need a subpoena for that information. I asked if there had been any recent activity on the account beyond the utility payments. She paused and then said she wasn't able to discuss account details further. But before she hung up, she asked me something that I haven't been able to forget. She said, "Are you with the Tulsa Water Department?" I said yes. She said, "You're the 3rd person from there who's called about this account. The other 2 were years ago. I hope you're doing all right." I asked her what she meant by that. She said she had to go and she hung up. I want to pause here and describe my mental state at this point. I was not panicking. I was not having paranoid thoughts. I was a municipal employee who had found a clear, documentable anomaly in public infrastructure, an anomaly that other employees knew about, that had a financial trail, and that corresponded to physical structures I could see with my own eyes and touch with my own hands. Everything I had found was real. It was all explainable in pieces: aging infrastructure, legacy accounts, informal institutional knowledge. What was not explainable was the totality, the entire system. 7 houses built in 1974 on land that was never platted, occupied for 50 years by no one and everyone, maintained by an invisible hand, served by utility infrastructure that was installed, metered, billed, and paid for through proper channels, all without ever appearing on a single official map or record. It wasn't hidden. It was ignored. There's a difference. I went back on a Wednesday afternoon. I brought my department camera, the one we use for documenting infrastructure conditions. I photographed the road, the houses, the meter boxes, the exposed sections of service line. I took 37 photographs. When I got back to the office and uploaded them to my computer, they were all there. Clear, properly exposed, showing exactly what I had seen. I mention this because I know how stories like this go. The photographs always disappear. The evidence always vanishes. Mine didn't. I still have them. They show 7 ordinary houses on an ordinary residential street, and the only remarkable thing about them is that the street is not supposed to be there. On my second visit, I was more thorough. I walked the full length of the road, which curves in a gentle crescent about 600 feet long. I looked more closely at the houses. What I noticed this time was the details that were wrong. Not dramatically wrong, subtly wrong, in ways that you wouldn't see unless you were looking. The curtains in every house were positioned identically, open exactly the same width, pulled to the same side. The welcome mats, where present, were oriented at the same angle to the door frame. The garden hoses were coiled in the same direction, the same number of loops. The grass in each yard was the same height, not approximately the same, but precisely the same, as if cut simultaneously by the same machine. The houses themselves, though superficially varied in their brick color and trim details, had identical footprints. Not similar, identical. The same house 7 times with cosmetic variations. None of this is supernatural. None of this is impossible. A developer building 7 homes in 1974 would absolutely use the same floor plan with different exterior treatments. Yards maintained by the same landscaping service would be cut to the same height. But the totality of it, the uniformity, the precision, the absence of any sign of individual human habitation, despite the presence of furniture visible through windows, produced an effect that I can only describe as wrongness. The place looked like a model of a neighborhood rather than a neighborhood, like a diagram of how humans live, made by something that had studied the subject carefully but had never quite been one. I was standing in front of the 4th house when I heard something. A sound from inside, not a voice, not a footstep, but the sound of water, running water, stronger than a dripping faucet. It sounded like someone had turned on a tap full force. It lasted for approximately 8 seconds and then stopped. I checked the meter box in front of that house the next day. The register showed a usage spike consistent with 8 to 10 seconds of full flow from a standard residential faucet, approximately 1.2 gallons. Someone or something had turned on a faucet while I was standing outside. I want to tell you that I handled this with professional composure. The truth is that I went back to my truck and left immediately, and I did not return for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I did my normal work, attended my daughter's school play, replaced the brake pads on my wife's car, and thought about Quanah Heights approximately every 45 minutes. When I went back, it was because of something I found in the billing records. I had been reviewing the monthly usage figures for all 7 accounts going back as far as our digital records allow, to 1994 when the billing system was computerized. For most of that 30-year span, usage was low and consistent, between 3,000 and 6,000 gallons per month per address, consistent with slow leaks and occasional fixture activation. But there were spikes. Irregular ones, sometimes years apart, sometimes clustered. And when I graphed them and compared the dates to our departmental records, I found a correlation that made me feel physically ill. Every usage spike corresponded within 48 hours to a documented visit by a water department employee. Every time one of us went out there, water usage surged. Not before, not randomly, after, as if the houses noticed they were being watched and responded. The largest spike in the record was in September 1994. Usage across all 7 accounts jumped to over 22,000 gallons in a single weekend. That was the weekend Bill Cons visited on a Saturday. The weekend after which he requested a transfer and never went back. 22,000 gallons in 2 days across 7 houses is the equivalent of every faucet, every toilet, every fixture in every house running simultaneously for hours. I have not been able to determine what happens to the water. The 7 service lines feed into the houses. There are no sewer connections shown on any of our infrastructure maps for that area. No septic systems are permitted through the county health department. The water goes in and does not, as far as I can document, come out. This is the point where I made a decision that Marcus Delano would not approve of. I went back on a Saturday. It was early afternoon, warm, overcast. I parked in my usual spot at the edge of the road. The first thing I noticed was that the curtains were different. Not different curtains, the same curtains, but positioned differently. They were open wider. In some houses, fully open. And through those open windows, I could see more of the interiors than I had previously. I could see living rooms with furniture arranged facing the windows. Couches, armchairs, positioned as if for viewing the road. In at least 2 houses, I could see dining tables set with plates and glasses. Not food, just place settings as if in anticipation. The second thing I noticed was the sound. Not silence this time. Water. I could hear it from multiple houses simultaneously. Not dripping, flowing. A steady, pressurized flow, like multiple fixtures running at once. The sound was constant and did not change as I walked along the road. The third thing I noticed was in the last house at the far end of the crescent. The front door was open. Not wide open, open approximately 8 inches. I could see a strip of interior, beige carpet, a hallway, the edge of a framed picture on the wall. And I could see that the hallway light was on. There is no electrical service to Quanah Heights. I have verified this with PSO. There are no accounts, no meter installations, no transformer connections. There has never been electrical service to that location, but the light was on. I did not go inside. I want to be clear about that. I stood in the road and looked at that open door for what felt like 5 minutes, and then I walked back to my truck. As I was walking, I heard something behind me that I will not attempt to characterize definitively because I do not trust my perception of it. It sounded like a door closing. It could have been the wind. I did not turn around to check. I drove back to the maintained road, through the easement gate and back into the city. My hands were shaking slightly, which has never happened to me on a job site before. I stopped at a quick trip on 36th Street North and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes drinking a bottle of water, and the bitter irony of that was not lost on me. The following Monday, I checked the billing system. Usage over that weekend across the 7 accounts, 19,400 gallons. The highest spike since 1994. I have not been back to Quanah Heights. That was 6 weeks ago. 3 days after my Saturday visit, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Not an internal department address, not a format I could identify. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained only a string of numbers, 421700038927. I recognized the format immediately. It's a utility account number. Our utility account number format, I looked it up. It's my account, my home. My water service. There was no thread in the email, no message, no demand, just my account number sent from nowhere as if to say, we know where your water comes from too. I have not reported any of this through official channels. I understand now why no one does. It's not because we're afraid of being disbelieved. Everything I've found is documented, photographed, and verifiable. It's because the system is working. The water flows, the bills are paid, the accounts are current. Whatever Quanah Heights is, it has been functioning within our infrastructure for half a century without causing a single service disruption, a single billing default, or a single complaint. It is, by every metric we use to evaluate our system, a model customer, and that's what frightens me most. Not the empty houses, not the impossible lights, not the water flowing into nowhere. What frightens me is the institutional accommodation. Someone installed those meters in 1975 and never questioned why. Someone has been processing those checks every month since 1976 and never flagged them. Someone coded those accounts into our digital system during the 1994 migration and never raised a concern. Generation after generation of employees has maintained the equipment, read the meters, and kept quiet, not because they were threatened, but because the system asked them to and they complied. Because it was easier to service the anomaly than to confront it. I think about the water. I think about where it goes, into pipes that feed into houses where no one lives, flowing from faucets that no one turns on, pouring into drains that connect to nothing. I think about 22,000 gallons in a weekend, rushing through those 7 houses while Bill Carnes stood outside and watched. I think about what needs that much water. What has been sitting in those houses for 50 years, growing slowly, being fed by the same system that feeds my house, my children's school, the hospital on 61st Street. I think about the fact that I cannot stop the flow because I do not control it. The accounts are paid, the service is authorized, and there is no procedural mechanism for disconnecting a customer in good standing. Last week I pulled up the hydraulic model again. The 15% demand discrepancy that started all of this has increased. It's now at 18%. The usage figures for the 7 accounts have risen steadily since my Saturday visit and have not returned to baseline. And yesterday, this is the last thing I will document here, I noticed a new demand node in the model. An 8th node. Further northeast, past the end of the Quanah Heights Crescent, deeper into the trees along Bird Creek. A new metered connection I cannot find installation records for. A new account in our billing system with a service address on a street called North Tanasi Court. Usage in its first month of recorded activity. 6,200 gallons. Payment method, check. Bank, Farmers and Merchants of Catoosa. Account holder, Quanah Heights Homeowners Association. It's growing. I don't know what's in those houses. I don't know what the water feeds. I don't know what Bill Carnes saw in 1994 that made him leave the department. I don't know who or what sent me that email. I don't know why the usage increases when we visit, or why the doors open, or how lights turn on in buildings with no power. But I know this. The system was designed to bring water to people, and something that is not people has been drinking from it for 50 years, and now it knows I've been watching. And it wants me to know that it can see my house from inside the pipes. I'm going to work tomorrow. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to service the pressure complaints and replace the aging valves and write my reports. And I am not going to drive past that easement gate ever again. And every morning when I turn on my kitchen faucet, I will think about what's at the other end of the line, in the dark, in the place that isn't on any map, swallowing water by the 1,000-gallon and growing one house at a time into something I cannot name and no one will stop, because the bills are paid. And in this system, that's all that matters.